So, have you ever been talking to someone and it feels like you're speaking different languages? You're saying something, but they're hearing something different. Or you're not saying something and an assumption is made. Well, there's so much about the way that we grew up and the homes that we lived in and the ways that our parents communicated that becomes a part of not only your attachment style, but the way you show up in relationships. And I think that we all know this on some level, but in this video today, I want to give you a deeper, fuller, more expansive understanding of that so that you can make sense of some of the confusing parts of yourself and the relationship that you may have been in or maybe you still are in it. If you're new here, I'm Ketra Thompson, and what I do with my clients is we go back through the hypnotherapy process into the subconscious mind to reframe those limiting beliefs that are keeping you stuck in your relationship, keeping you stuck in your life. And then we couple that with relationship, attachment style, and mind coaching so that you have all the tools you need to implement that without fighting against that subconscious programming, because our subconscious controls over 95% of everything we think, feel, and do. So if you'd like to learn more, you can always check out the link in the description below where you can set up a completely complimentary consultation call so that you and I can chat and we can get to the heart of your specific issues, because everyone is unique and everyone deserves one-on-one unique care so that they can actually get to the heart of what's going on and reach your goals. So check that out. And if this content resonates with you, I really appreciate it when you can click like and subscribe so you can be notified every time I post a new video. And it helps me reach more people with a message of hope. Hopefully, it's a message of hope and clarity. So I read a book recently that has made me think a little bit more about this dynamic of the influence of the way the people we grew up with behaved. I read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And in that book, he has so much interesting stuff to say. But he talks about this example of airline pilots. I think it was Korean airline pilots that had more accidents than any other airline. And even some other ones, I think out of Colombia as well. So they researched all of these things and realized that the cultural behavioral expectations of the way they communicate is very, very different. So they see the pilot, the co-pilot sees the pilot like as his boss, and he would never tell him what to do because these are respect cultures. So they just kind of would drop these little hints. They would insinuate, maybe we should check this other thing or the weather. And the actual pilot would be so tired and drained that he wasn't even picking up on it, even though they were from the same culture. Or there was a terrible accident and the communication with the New York airport was so different than, I think it was the Colombian pilots that he was telling the story about. They aren't bold. They're not bossy. They are very passive in their communication. But in New York, they're just clear. They're bold. They're kind of harsh, but they kind of have to be because they're dealing with so much air traffic. And so there was all these assumptions made about what was meant by the tone of voice that was in part of this communication. And they weren't, because they were trained to be so passive, they were not speaking clearly and directly to the control tower. And it resulted in a really fatal crash. They were speaking in roundabout terms instead of being direct and saying, we are out of fuel. Give us directions now. They're just saying, fuel might be an issue, or I think we're running low, or okay, just very passive. And so it's interesting because I think this kind of plays out in a lot of ways. If you think of that old Christmas song, Baby, It's Cold Outside, the woman in that song is very coy and very playful and passive. Oh, I really can't stay, and he's like, but baby, it's cold outside. I have to go. I really should go, blah, And so it's this playful sort of thing that was just part of the culture of the time during that song. And so as we view that song today, there's a lot of people who think it's manipulative or it's coercive. And the reality is that it was the way that culture and society was when that song was made. A woman couldn't just outright say, yes, I want to stay with you. I want to stay the night. She had to kind of play this game to uphold her dignity, the view of her being, a virtuous person. And so we oftentimes forget that the way we show up in our relationships has so much to do with the way that our home culture was. And that plays in so much to our attachment style, because if someone was big and bold and reactive to the things that you would say, depending on your personality, you might have shrunk down more, shut down more, not been more open, or maybe it gave you license to be big and bold in your expression. And then we come together with a partner who had parents who never raised their voice, who were very passive about everything they said and did, who didn't communicate their feelings, who really didn't say, I love you, who might have had high expectations, but never really communicated or argued. And if we didn't see them argue, we also oftentimes didn't see them repair. So someone might have no concept of how to repair. They might think arguing is just the biggest, baddest, scariest thing, because they also don't know how to repair from an argument. And they might see someone with a big, passionate voice as someone that's attacking them. And I remember when I was early in my marriage, I was married at 19, and I did kind of have a family that would, my sister and I had bedrooms in the basement, so our parents would kind of yell at us from down the stairs, like, hey, come up here, whatever. And we were pretty vocal. We didn't scream and yell a lot, but we were fairly outspoken. And I think, my parents kind of drank and had friends over and had this sort of boisterous vibe to how they were at some points. And I remember early in my marriage, me being like passionate and vocal about something I was saying was really like off-putting to my then spouse. And he grew up in a home of no arguing, of not a lot of affection either, not a lot of like hugs, kisses, and I love yous, which I had. I had lots of hugs and kisses and I love yous and, just love and passion and sometimes arguing. But he didn't have any of that. It was very non-confrontational. Dad was pretty much not involved in raising of the kids. And so to him, it felt very, very odd to experience that. And so when you're in a relationship where you don't really know exactly, you feel like you're not being heard, you're not being seen, you're not being understood, or you don't understand the person you're with, it could be because there is such deep programming about what things mean. And so I think it's interesting that research shows that when people can speak two languages, if they make decisions in their non-birth language, their secondary language, they make clearer, better decisions. And it's because the words in the new language are not attached to the emotional meaning behind them that we attached when we were forming those words, when we were forming our subconscious mind, when we were really, really young. And so if you have a second language, you're just kind of looking at the facts. If you talk it out in that language and you can make a clearer decision. In your birth language, there's all the feelings and emotions that went into the wiring of who you are attached to certain words. And so when you're using your original language, you're going to make decisions more based on emotion, which is why most decisions that people make in every area are based on emotion. Where you choose to eat, where you choose to shop, the purchases you make, whether it's a car or a partner, there's so much that is about the emotion of how you feel in any environment. And that has so much to do with your programming. And so I just find it interesting to see the little thread that connects all of these things. And so the biggest mistake I think we make is assuming that the other person feels the way we feel. So when someone does something, we think, well, if I was going to do that thing, I would feel a certain way in order to be able to bring myself to do that thing. If I was acting this way, I would love my partner. I would only do that if I was really in love. Someone else might not be that way. They might be doing it to hold up a facade or to look a certain way or be perceived a certain way, but not out of the abundance or overflow of their love and adoration for their partner. And so we don't always see things clearly. And that really happens when you're dealing with someone who is narcissistic in their tendencies. Partners have a really hard time understanding because they see a good version of the person, they see a manipulative version. After a while, they don't know which version is real anymore because in their mind, they think, well, I would never do XYZ if I didn't love someone. So they must love me because they do these things. I would also never do these things over here that they do if I love someone because that's not loving. But they must love me because I would never do XYZ if I didn't love someone and they do XYZ, even though I would never do ABC and they do ABC. Like, you see the dynamic of confusion? And so we assume that the other person is like us, and they're not. Their perceptions are different. Their culture of their home that they grew up in is different. And so making those assumptions can be part of one of the biggest problems in relationships. So this is where dealing with those emotional triggers is really important, because as soon as you say something to someone and they feel judged or emotionally triggered, even if you're just trying to have a normal conversation, communication has stopped, even though you're still talking. And that's because the emotional flood from the assumption that they're making about what you're saying and doing is stopping your ability to communicate. And so we have to deal with the emotional triggers so that we can actually have real healthy communication and not assume that the way we look on the outside is a determination. So one of the most interesting studies that was done, and I can't remember if it was John Gottman that did it, but anyway, what they found, it might have been Dr. Raymond. Anyway, sorry if I don't remember. They had couples hooked up to all of these scanners and stuff for the brain. They took their cortisol levels before and after. They did all the studies. And they had them, for the purpose of the study, argue about something that was a heated argument between them, something they had argued about before, they could not find resolve. And what they found is the women were far more expressive. They were far more passionate in their expression in the argument. Their tone changed. They were more animated. There was much more passion. Let's call it that. They weren't screaming, but like, it was visible. It was noticeable on the outside of them. And what they found is that on the inside, women were actually quite calm. They were elevated a bit, but not anything compared to the men. Now, the men in these arguments looked like they were calm, cool, like collected the whole time. They did not show any elevation of emotion. And on the inside, they were like off the charts. Like, they were completely dysregulated in every way. Their cortisol levels were way higher. Their heart rate was way higher. They were far more dysregulated than the women. But on the outside, they looked like they had it all together. So if you were someone who said, like, if let's say that man was looking at that woman and thinking, if I was going to be that expressive and that passionate, I would have to be so mad, like furious, fuming, like over the top mad if I was going to look like that. But they'd be completely wrong, because on the inside, she was quite calm and regulated. And so it's a very tricky thing to assume that other people are like us. Just like if the wife in that scenario had looked at her husband's calm demeanor and just thinks, he just doesn't care. He doesn't give a shit. Like, he's not even hearing me. There's nothing there. There's no expression. There's no evidence of feelings. There's no signs of life. And she would be thinking, because for me, if it mattered to me, I would show it. I would be passionate and expressionate. And so You go through life thinking that this other person is wired like you, and they're not. And that's why curiosity is so important. But you really can't have mutual, on both sides, curiosity if you haven't dealt with the underlying triggers. So, our subconscious mind is primarily programmed from birth to age 7. And we are in the theta brainwave state during those years. We're actually in hypnosis. And during that time, we don't have any discernment. We're creating meaning to everything we experience, but with a very naive point of view. And so that programming then becomes this thing that drives our life. So if we have wounds inside of us that say, I'm not enough, I'm maybe not lovable, I'm not good enough, I've never met the standard for the people in my life, whatever they are, we might not even know they're there, but they show up in our intimate relationships most of all. And when they show up, it's an opportunity for us to not look at our partner and say, well, if I did that, I would feel this way. Like, they are not you. You are not them. But you've got to deal with why you're feeling the emotional trigger, regulate your nervous system, and be able to come back to that conversation with curiosity. Like, tell me more, help me understand. What am I missing? It seems to me like you're feeling this way, but I might be wrong. Am I right? Am I wrong? Really starting to have that conversation, it requires you to stay regulated in your nervous system. And if you haven't reframed the subconscious programming that is running all of those beliefs, then you're going to have a hard time staying regulated in your nervous system enough to have the curiosity to have a really healthy connection. So I hope this is making sense to you. I hope it's clicking together and putting together the pieces. We do this in society as well. We look at society and go, well, they must think this, that, and the other thing, because that's how I would think if I did that. And it's not necessarily true. The culture of our upbringing, the culture of religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, our home, our attachment style, our subconscious programming conditions us to see the world a certain way, even if it's not fully accurate. That's how we feel on the inside. Our brain is programmed to find what is in there. Like, the subconscious is programmed to find out in our world what is already in our subconscious programming. So what we reaffirm over and over, this never happens, this always happens, nobody can be trusted, I'm always going to get rejected, whatever the belief is, you keep thinking it and reiterating it and really cementing it in there. And that's what you're going to see in the world, even though that's not all the possibilities there are, but that's what you're going to see. And that's why that subconscious work is such a big deal. It's a really big deal to rewire, reframe that subconscious programming, and also to get your nervous system slowed down, calmed down, so that we don't make assumptions of other people. And in the process, we let go of controlling other people around us, because we no longer let their actions determine our value. We no longer make assumptions about their actions, because we now can see that we don't even know what those actions meant. We don't even know what those things mean to that person. And so we can let go. We can let go of our assumptions, and we can also let go of our attempts to control those other people. We can communicate better. We can do our work, which is the self-reflection work, but we have to be honest with ourselves if the other person isn't willing to do the self-reflection work and to realize that they have some programming that actually needs to change. And so it was interesting because in that book, Korean Air took it really seriously, and they brought in all these experts, and not only did the experts help them get better with their English, but it also helped them to be assertive and to stop going to an automatic default into this very culturally accepted way of being that was all like a respect model that was very calm, respectful, but also quite passive. They realized they had to be direct. They had to communicate clearly. They had to understand what needed to be communicated, communicate it boldly and clearly, and go against their programming. And they did it. And they completely turned around that airline industry because of the way they reformatted that. And they realized that. And that's what you have to do too. You have to acknowledge that the way you were programmed isn't always serving you. It isn't always making you see the correct assumptions. And your self-protective functions, they are not serving you like they once did. As a child, they served you because you needed to stay in connection with the people that you needed care from. But as an adult, they're creating walls around you. They're creating barriers, and you trick yourself into thinking you're protecting yourself from being hurt. But there is no such thing. You will either be hurt by isolating yourself and never having what you want and really need in your life, because that will hurt you. More people die from complications of loneliness and isolation than anything else. Or you will be hurt by risking showing up in the world with an open heart. And it doesn't mean you lose all of your sensibilities, your ability to, have common sense and go, oh, I can see, like, this isn't a good fit. This person, is probably not going to work with me. It's that you slow everything down and you're curious and you're open. I truly think the most brave thing anyone can do is to be devastated, brokenhearted, disappointed in life, and still choose to show up in the world with an open heart, with warmth, with curiosity, with boundaries, which are not punishment for everyone else. They are knowing when your alarm bells go off inside of you, knowing when you really should leave a situation, knowing when something isn't healthy, and then creating a boundary there. And so I think the most vulnerable, warm people are the most boundaried in a healthy way, not in a push everyone away capacity, because they are still entering a world with warmth and openness. Brene Brown talks about how she found that the happiest, warmest, loving people in all of her research were also the best with boundaries. And we think that shutting someone out and running away and creating distance is a boundary. It's not. It's a fear response. And so when we do that with avoidant attachment style, we're not actually communicating anything. We're running away. We're shutting down. We're flooded. And a real boundary communicates clearly, just like the airline pilots had to determine what was needed, what the issue was. They had to express it clearly. Someone who has good boundaries understands what the need is in a situation, communicates it clearly, asks for their own needs to be met, and also steps into that space with curiosity about the other person, an openness, a lack of assumption, a lack of judgment. So hopefully this was helpful. I help my clients do this all the time in my 12-week program, where we couple those deep hypnotherapy sessions with coaching so that you can address all of this on the subconscious level and really show up in the world in a new way. And I also have a new program that's coming out, Attachment Detox, that is going to be something you can kind of DIY. You can kind of do it on your own. You can listen to the hypnosis recordings and do the work on your own while joining into some group calls as well for people who are at that point in the journey. And then if you really want that custom work, that VIP sort of experience where you're one-on-one, that would be the 12-week program. So you can check that out. You can set up the consultation call, and you can also download in the links below a completely free hypnosis recording for self-concept to help you work on your self-concept. And you can take the self-betrayal quiz that's down there as well, just to see, are you betraying yourself? And it's going to give you some very specific information and steps that you can take when you're done with that quiz, so that you can start that process of breaking away from that self-betrayal pattern. So I hope this was helpful. And again, please click like and subscribe if you'd like to be notified every time I post a new video. And until next time, I hope you curate a life by your own design.